or whether brown bears believe in gender stereotypes. Well, first a little bit about me. So I'm sitting right here. There, you can see this dot here, Svanhovd. So we're over the Arctic Circle, quite far in the north. If I look out of my window, I can see that autumn has started here. It's a bit rainy and under 10 degrees, so I'm not sure where the rest of all the people is sitting, but I'm guessing that everyone else has it a little bit warmer than I have. Here, this is what it looks like. I'm sitting somewhere here in this building, there, somewhere in this building. This is the summer picture, obviously, although you can see already a little bit of brown in the trees. Yes, a little bit about me as well. I was predominantly a brown bear researcher, so I have done my PhD in population genetics in brown bears. So I've looked at how genes are transmitted across northern Scandinavia to find out more about what we can do to help preserve the species in Northern Europe. And some of the aspects of my work I will present here. So short about the contents of this webinar. I will give a short introduction about the difference between male and female brown bears, if there are any, and how we include these differences in research, and what do these differences mean for brown bear management. Oh yeah, my nationality. I am German, but I have lived here in Norway now for 7 years, so I'm an expat. Yes, so let's start with females versus males and brown bears. So it is very difficult actually for brown bears, or if you see a brown bear in the field, to understand or to guess whether you're seeing a male or a female. Because in brown bears, the phenotype, so how a bear looks and how big it is, very much dependent on its access to food. So areas where there is abundance of food and high energy food, bears tend to be bigger in general. And areas which have a little bit less energetic food, the bears tend to be smaller. For example, one difference, if you think of grizzly bears in Alaska, they tend to be very big, bulky bears. Or in Kamchatka, far over in eastern Russia, those are very large bears, while the European brown bear tends to be on the smaller side. It's also so that female bears in general are supposed to be a little bit smaller than male bears. They're supposed to have a little bit smaller ears relative to head size, smaller and narrower head, a tapered muzzle, so instead of just going like, straight forward, it's getting smaller and more pointed towards the nose. They have narrower shoulders, especially relative to the head, and slimmer and shorter legs. And I have here two pictures of two brown bears. So you can guess what kind of, what sexes do you see here? Are they both male? Is this one a female or this one a male? Is this one a male and this a female, or are they both females? Your answer you can type into the chat. So we have 4 answers now. Everyone says C, apparently. So yes, this is a little bit the easier one because I have only 2 pictures, and they are like very good examples of their sex. So this is a very nice round male bear. You can see that he has a very bulky head and a big nose and very round and large shoulders. And this here is a female. I said that the ears are supposed to be a little bit smaller relative to the head, but it looks that this female, for example, has fairly large ears. But you can see, if you look closely, that the nose is a little bit slimmer as opposed to the nose of this guy here. And in general, she is a little bit slimmer. But it is really difficult to say to tell from the field. You have very large females and you have very small males. And then, of course, it depends on whether they're adult or just juveniles. So, two things that are, or some terms that are important for my talk here is home range. That is going to be important. So home range is the area an individual uses regularly to cover all its basic needs. So it's related to territory, but it can be a little bit more large. A territory is an area which an animal defends against intruders, whereas in home range is not necessarily all of its parts are defended against intruders, but it's the area an individual regularly uses to cover all its basic needs. And then we have dispersal. That is a very important term. You will understand from the next slide. Dispersal is the movement out of the native home range. So where the individual was born, that is the native home range. And as an adult, it may or may not move out of its natal home range to settle permanently someplace else. So in this picture here, the individual was born here in this blue patch, and then it moves out, and then of course it may come across other suitable habitats, but there is already someone living there. So this is indicated by this orange occupied patch areas. So it will travel so far until it finds an unoccupied patch where it can settle down and make its adult home range there. And what is interesting in bears is that this dispersal movement is sex-specific. So it depends on whether you're a male or a female, how far you travel. This is indicated here. This is Scandinavia, so here is Norway. Where I live is not on the map, so it's far north, it's somewhere up here. And here is Sweden. And you can see this is just exemplified, but it is correct in terms of the relationship in size. So here you can see the size, the kilometers. So a female will travel on average just 28 kilometers away from its natal home range. You can see it's pretty short actually, whereas a male may disperse on average 119 kilometers away from its native home range before it finds its own adult home range. And you can see the maximum distance is even larger. I mean, it's difficult to be 100% sure because sometimes, you know, this radio collars, you would have to do this with radio collars, for example, or you have to have good luck to find an individual that you recorded in its home range to find it somewhere else and know that it was the individual that you saw in its native home range. But researchers in Sweden have found out that females have a maximum travel distance of 90 kilometers, whereas males can travel up to 467 kilometers. So that's a huge distance to cover. So that is one of the main differences between male and female brown bears. Another one is that females show something that is called female philopatry. I talked about home ranges and how it's not necessarily similar to territory, that in that it may not necessarily be defended at all times. This means that home ranges can overlap. And what you can see here is the more related two females are to each other, so whether they come from the same family or not, the more their home ranges tend to overlap. You can see that here. This is the degree of overlap here on this axis, and this is the degree of relatedness. So whether you're a first cousin or you know, an aunt once removed. So the less they are related to each other, the less their home ranges overlap. So it seems that relatives tolerate whether when another relative settles close to them. And also you can see that the further two individuals are to each other, this is here, there's the distance between two individuals, and this is the relatedness, so how genetically similar they are to each other. And this is usually based on that they come from the same family line. So the more related they are to each other, the closer they are to each other on a map. This evens out a little bit. This means that if we start, for example, with this female here, let's pretend that this is the mother, and then she has two offspring. She has a female offspring, so a daughter, and she has a male offspring, a son. So the son would move out far away, on average, like I said, 119 kilometers, and settle there, whereas the daughter would try to settle very close to its mother. And if this female bear also has two offspring, one female and another female, then these two would again settle closer to her. Whereas, for example, here, if this daughter, second in line, so to speak, so that the granddaughter of this female here, if she has a male offspring, then that would move away again. And so you can see that over time, they build up something like a family group that is called also female assemblages. So chances are high that if you look at the females in any area, that they all are related to each other. So they are more mothers, daughters, aunts, cousins, grandmothers, and that is called female philopatry. So these are the two main differences between male and female brown bears that we know of. Females form female assemblages, and the dispersal distance is larger in males than in females. And now comes another term that has something to do with this. It's called gene flow. What is gene flow actually? So if some of you who have attended maybe one of my first talks about DNA, you know perhaps that a gene is something that codes how our bodies are built up, whether we have gray eyes or green eyes. So basically genes determine our abilities and how we look like. And genes are important. But first I talk about gene flow here. So we have these two bears here, male, the blue one, and the female, and they have a daughter. And this daughter stays where it is, close to its mother. So now comes a brown bear, a male, from another area, travels here. See little footprints, and these two take a liking to each other, and they have another offspring, male bear. So that the genes from this bear and the genes from this female, they unite basically in another male bear. And then this male bear travels in another area. As I said, they disperse further. So here it goes off into another area. It mates with a local female. They have an offspring, a male and a female. The male moves away. It takes its genes with it out of the area, while the female stays here. And there's another male coming from another area, moves into this area of this female. They have a daughter, and this daughter stays here. So the genes travel, or basically are transported by the males from one area into the other. You can see that here, right? If you have a question, just to this, just put it in the chat box, and I will try to answer it. One thing that is important to remember is that dispersal is not necessarily gene flow, because if this male moves here into this area, but he doesn't find a female to mate with and produce offspring, then his genes are lost when he dies. So gene flow, it is necessary to have a mating and a resulting offspring that survives. Gene flow is dependent on mating. So you can have all the movement in an area that you want, but you may not have necessarily gene flow if no one is mating with each other. And why is this important? Well, genetic diversity is a term that describes the genetic variability within a species. I have put here pictures of several bears, some of those taken in our hair traps and the projects that we have up here. You might have heard the talk from one of my colleagues about hair traps. And you can see they all look a little bit different, right? Like this one here, for example, has a white mark here at the shoulder. This one has a very round head. This one has very large ears. This one is a little bit smaller. And they look different because they have different genes. They may also have different abilities. One may be stronger than another. One may be able to survive with less water. Genetic diversity is good because it means that we all have different abilities to adapt to our environment. And if we lose that genetic diversity, then this may lead to less fitness. So an animal or a population of animals, a group of animals that is not very diverse, they share all the same abilities to live within a certain environment. If that environment changes, no one of this group of individuals may be able to adapt to this new environment. So if, for example, if you imagine that a bear prefers an area that has, I don't know, on average 15 degrees temperature, right? And now you have, for example, climate change, and the area gets hotter. So maybe it's not anymore 15 degrees on average, but maybe it's 18 degrees on average. Not all bears may be able to tackle this change in temperature. They may die out because of this. So for the longevity of a species, it's very important to have genetic diversity. And if we don't have gene flow, so if genes do not travel from one area to another, that may mean that in a particular area, we don't have a high diversity of genes. So we have less fitness. This may also mean that we have less and weaker offspring that may not be able to survive, and less ability to adapt to changes in the environment. So genetic diversity is something that conservation genetists are very concerned about, very interested in. In my research, we have taken, these are all bears here in Sweden and Norway, and you can see that we have kept the information whether the genetic material that we have is from a male bear or from a female bear. And one thing that is very important that you can see here is that we have a fairly even distribution of males and females across the map. So we have taken these samples and analyzed them with something that is called spatial autocorrelation analysis. I'm going to explain this now. It's one method that you can use to look at genetic or sex-specific differences. What you want to look for in spatial autocorrelation analysis is whether there is a pattern in how individuals are distributed across the landscape, or are they distributed randomly. So what you do, or the principle how it works, is that you take all of the individuals and now you compare how genetically similar are all of the individuals that are at a distance of 0 to 5 kilometers to each other. So you can see all of these individuals are between 0 and 5 kilometers distance to each other. And you compare them, how genetically similar are they to each other. And then you get, as a result, something like an average across all of these comparisons that is called a relatedness index, R. Then in the next step, I jumped one ahead. So in the next step, you take all individuals that are 5 to 10 kilometers distance from each other. So that would be here the gray. The gray pairings have we done in the step before. So now we take the individuals that are 5 to 10 kilometers apart and look how different are these two animals with each other. Are they related or are they not related? And how many genes do they share? How similar genetically are they to each other? And then we again estimate the average relatedness index for this distance class, it's called. And then in the next step, we move another distance class up. So now we look at the bears from 10 to 15 kilometers. And again, we estimate the average relatedness index R. And this we continue all across our pairs of individuals. If I go back, for example, here, so we would first have, all of these small individuals, and in the end we would compare, for example, this individual with that individual there and compare. Are they very like each other or not? So that we cover all of the area. And then when we have done all of our comparisons, we estimate the statistical significance. I'm not going to go into the detail because it's a very complicated process, and also I'm not a statistician. I'm a user of these programs, so I can't in fact explain in detail how it works. But basically what you're looking for is there a pattern in this? So are animals close to each other on the map? Are they also more related to each other than individuals that are far away from each other? And is this random or is there a pattern to it? And then you get, as a result, you get something like this, a graph. So this here is the genetic similarity coefficient for, here you can see here, and this, right here you see 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. These are the distance classes. So the value here at 10 is the value for all the animals between 5 and 10 kilometers apart from each other. And so you get a line here. You can see it goes down, which means that the closer two individuals are, the more likely it is that, the more related they are to each other, the more genes they share. And then I was talking about statistical significance. You can see here these two dotted lines here. And they mean a value that falls between these two lines here means that this value is no different than what you would expect if it was a random distribution. So, of course, even if individuals are distributed across the landscape, just by chance, two of them will be close to each other. But if you just have once in a while two individuals that are close to each other on the map and that are also related to each other, and not regularly, then that is just a chance event. But there is no pattern to it. But everything that falls outside of these lines here, these dotted lines, means that this is more than what we could expect from a random distribution. So the fact that these here are more genetically similar to each other, the closer they are to each other, means, okay, there is a pattern here. And that indicates that depending on what sex you have been comparing, that individuals who are related to each other are close to each other, and there's a meaning to this. And this we have done with all the bears that you remember. It's a little bit small, but I had to get all of these four here together on one map. And what you can see here is the red lines are for the females, and the blue lines are for the males. And you can see here, remember, these are the distance classes, and here is the relatedness index, how genetically similar they are to each other. And here is these lines. It's a little bit difficult to see here, the lines when it means that it's statistically significant, so if there is a pattern to it. And you can see that here in this area, and here in this area, and here in this area, these three have all something in common, right? You can see that the females have this, the more closely they are on the map, the higher is the genetic relatedness index. right? You can see that, huh? That it tapers off. Until here, at some point, then it's a random distribution. There is no pattern anymore to be seen. Whereas for the males, you can see that in general, there is no relationship. Whether two males are close to each other on the map or not, there doesn't seem to be a pattern to it. It's just random chance, and most of them are not even very closely related to each other, even if they are on the map close to each other. Right? Do you see this here? Or do I need to go a little bit more into it? Just give me a ring back on the chat and see if you have understood what I meant. Don't be afraid. I can explain more thoroughly if you want to. And then you see here the area here, right? And I hope you notice the difference here of the blue line. It also is way above this area of statistical significance, right? And it seems to follow the line of the females, right? So we have here in this area, this is here, I have a bigger map coming, that this means that here in this area, the males also show a pattern that the closer they are to each other, the more related they are to each other. And that was something that we found very strange. I can take it here a little bit. Remember I told you about, in the beginning, about sex-specific dispersal in bears, that male bears tend to move across a larger distance than females. So the males are the ones that are supposed to transport the genes across the landscape. But here in this area, something has happened. And the bears show signs of philopatry here in this area, right? So they don't behave always like expected. And now the big question remains, of course, what does this mean for management and what does this mean for the bears? It seems like, although everyone thought so, that males always travel further than the females and that they are responsible for the genetic diversity within bears, they may not always fulfill their role as gene distributors. This may mean that here in this area, if the male bears don't move out of the area, the chances are higher that we have incidences of inbreeding. Inbreeding is the mating between close relatives. So you can imagine if there is one bear that mates with the male bear that mates with a female, and they have a daughter with each other, chances are high then, if that daughter stays in the area, that the father mates with the daughter. Or that if these two bears here, the male bear and the female, when they have a son, the son doesn't move out of the area, that maybe he mates with an aunt. So they are genetically very close to each other, and this may lead to the accumulation of bad genes. For example, I don't have a good example now that comes to my mind, but you have heard probably of certain genetic illnesses in humans. For example, I don't remember what it is in England, but when you cut yourself and you bleed and it doesn't stop bleeding, this is a typical example in humans, for example, of a sign of inbreeding. Or it may be more in areas where you have a lot of inbreeding. For example, in the royal houses in Europe, that was a very, thank you, hemerophilia. Super. So that was a sign of close relatives mating with each other. And this you may find also in the animal kingdom. So you have may end up with less fit bears and less and weaker offspring. So if there is a problem with this in the area, then we would need to know about this. And for this, of course, we need to understand what are the causes for this. And one possible cause for this in this area may be illegal hunting. There are studies that have shown that in the north of Sweden, the acceptance of poaching is higher than in more southern areas. And poachers tend to go out when there is still snow on the ground, but the bears have already woken up. So they can move into areas with snow scooters where usually you don't really have access to. And then it may be that they're shooting bears that are about to go out. And this in turn may lead to an adaptation in the behavior of bears that they don't move out of the safe area anymore. They stay where they feel that they are safe and where they survive. So this is something that we have discovered in my PhD study, and we don't know exactly why this is happening. So we can't give any definite answers. But this is definitely something that, for example, the brown bear management in Scandinavia should look at and understand that males do not always behave like we expect them to. Yeah, and this was one example how you include sex-specific analysis. There are more possibilities to do, but I thought that it would be a bit too complicated to refer to any one analysis more than what I have done now. It's a little bit too complicated to have in a webinar of this format. But if you're interested in hearing more about this, you may just contact me. See here, I have my email here, so you can just contact me and ask me about this, and I can, yeah, I don't know, write you a little essay about this maybe that you want to share in your class, or you know, we can set up I don't know, a Skype conference or something like that. So I'm more than happy to answer further questions if you don't have can think of a question right now.